Based on what I learned yesterday from the telemetry of the very short Nano Talon flight, I came into the Mini Talon and my Sky Hunter to check perimeters and make any changes to them that were appropriate to all platforms. One thing I did do today, I actually did it on the Mini Talon and the Nano Talon in the past few days, but did not say anything. Under the firmware, we're up to version 4.16 on the Ardu plane now. Those versions have been coming pretty frequently. So what I did, real quick, you Ardu pilot people are going to understand this before I even say it. Those that aren't familiar with it, not so much. I came into my options before I upgraded to 4.1.6 and did a compare. And there's absolutely nothing different in the perimeter values. Default perimeter values can be changed in a release. And then sometimes it's just the functional code behind the scenes. And I fully suspect this is functional code behind the scenes. So in addition to upgrading this from 4.1.5, I upgraded it to 4.1.6 today. Again, the Mini Talon and Nano Talon had already been done so, even before the Nano Talon's flight, but not the Mini Talon. Mini Talon was on 4.1.5 the last flight. I've still got AutoCalc turned on because the Sky Hunter's not yet been maiden. And I'm beginning to understand that maidening an airplane in return to loiter circle isn't a bad thing to do, especially those of us with less experience. And let's see. I also do not want to use airspeed used during that maiden and AutoCalc flight. I'm told after the fact of the flight that I did with the Mini Talon, and we'll look at this in just a second. I alluded to it yesterday in the airspeed video I did. And I'll go ahead and reveal that today. So I'm going to set this back to 0 and not use it during that flight. Also on the battery, and I have not calibrated the power sensor on any of these platforms yet. I sort of suspect that the MRO one may have been, but I still have to do a pseudo calibration just to verify that it's correct. So basically none of them have been calibrated yet by me. Down here on the battery, if you remember, this option right here for the sag compensated voltage for 10 seconds on hard changes to the throttle. That's what I would call that for a airplane that's still using raw voltage. Don't want to do that. I'll set that to a 1. So that's the changes that I'm going to make to the Sky Hunter. But I'm also going to save away these perimeters in a, also going to write them to the platform. I'm also going to save away those perimeters in a perimeters Now, if I do a difference, that's what it used to be called, I think, a diff. Maybe that's my Unix talking again. Never can tell. I hear so many voices constantly. Now, if I do a compare parameters to the 4.1.5 version, I do see the airspeed used is different. The side compensated voltage for the battery failsafe is activated here in this current version that's loaded. This is the file, what it was before. And also, yeah, that's the only two I had to change for that. The rest of them are all the same. Now that just kind of verifies to me that I can actually come out here now and say goodbye to that one. And there's my Sky Hunter parameters. So let's look real quick at the telemetry file from the mini Talon that kind of made me understand better what people were telling me about don't use airspeed sensor during the auto calc. Don't set that to use airspeed. Okay, also some tidbits just for your information along the way. When you go in to play a telemetry log to look at what's going on, you can change what's being monitored in this screen and other screens, or you can look at everything. Go in here and look at whatever. But I did go back to the mini Talon's flight on the last day of the year. I'll set this in motion again. And you remember that particular airspeed sensor is reading low. And you can see that right here. Here's your ground speed, here's your airspeed. And I've put wind velocity and wind direction on the screen. And I can see two things now. It was more windy that day than I thought, and this number right here should probably be higher than the 10 miles per hour it is. I also don't think that's exactly right on the wind direction, but I'm not going to dispute that at this moment. I think it was coming from this direction, which would be south of west, in my humble opinion. It would be less than 270 degrees, and that's not what the 180 of that would be. Well, no, it would be towards 90. Anyway, so also change this one to distance traveled, because yesterday on the Nano Talon I flew almost 4 miles in that little 5-minute flight. I thought that was interesting. Well, it is interesting to me, but what I'm trying to pass on is the little tidbits. And you can see here again the airspeed on the 31st at the field for the wind velocity. To me, it was a very unwindy day. Oh, and look, here you go. This is changing so much. I bet a lot of us will go ahead and say right now, yeah, when there's no wind, that wind direction will just change all over the place. If there's a slight bit of wind, as in the maybe 1 to 3 miles an hour that there was that day. So changing these values and watching a flight that you had flown can be pretty interesting and tell you a lot of things about what's going on. So the log from the data flash log out of the SD card from December the 31st with the mini Talon, I was kind of shocked to find this. And this is why I changed one parameter. We'll just graph the airspeed here real quick. We also have down here the ratio resets, only 2 that day. Not sure why others didn't come out through here. I'll show you just a little bit about that in a second. And I'm just going to do this quick. We're going to graph the output of the throttle channel on that. You can see from this point here, there's some radical things going on there. From this point right here forward, not so much. The green is the channel 3 output from the flight controller. And I heard these things in the air, and if I could figure out a way to let you guys hear the sound of the prop, I could illustrate these things better rather than just saying, I heard something during the flight. But prop sounds are pretty boring things. They're fairly useful during the flight to tell you when strange things are going on. You want to just hear that just constant drone, never changing, maybe decreasing a little bit due to lessened voltage in the battery, current in the battery, energy in the battery, we'll say. But overall, no big changes and stuff. And as you can see on these green lines right here, I heard some really radical changes out of it. And I think this one in here is right on the cusp of that first airspeed ratio reset. I think that at that airspeed ratio, in my humble opinion, there we go. And now I'm holding down I was holding down the control key and sliding the graph to the right and zooming in on this. And as you can see, that does. Mr. Red Dog kind of reminded me of that today. That does separate out these messages down here where we can actually see them. I guess now that I do that, I guess this airspeed ratio reset took place right here. In my humble opinion, it takes place in the middle of this. It might be on the leading edge. I have nothing that says that. But if it's in the middle of this message in this area, then maybe it's on these white lines. I'm going to have to get more comfortable with these graphs. But anyway, somewhere around this ratio reset, the throttle just went crazy on the Mini Talon. Control key, pull it down a little. Zoom out. And I heard that near. And you can see right here again, I suspect on this. Well, again, this isn't in the middle of this ratio reset up to here. There's another little kind of ramp up in the throttle right here during this ratio reset. But anyway, the long and the short of this was, as I said, oops, dang it. I'm not sure what I'm doing there when I click and it does that. After the airspeed ratio got reset to 3.8, everything kind of calmed down. But prior to that, I heard some really large changes in the RPM on the motor of the Mini Talon, and you can see it right there. In my humble opinion, and based on what others have said to me, I think that was because I had the use airspeed sensor turned on during the calibration flight, almost the maiden flight of the Mini Talon. And that's 25% of the reason that I turned off the use airspeed sensor. And 75% of the reason is that people told me not to use the use airspeed sensor during the calibration or until the calibration's done. And this blurb right here of RPMs going crazy on the motor tells me they're right. And this blurb is the reason I weighted that decision 25% on my own to agree with them. Let me see if I can find the wind speed in this. I couldn't find it in the Nano Talon yesterday. Nope, I can't find where the wind speed calculation is in this list over here. I'll find it someday and tell you about it. But anyway, this blurb right here in the throttle that I heard during the flight is one of the reasons that I am not using the airspeed sensor until after it's properly calibrated. Okay, the last part of all this was that calibration seems to have a range on it. And in the Mini Talon, after that auto calc I just told you, the airspeed ratio was changed to 3.8. And the flying help, I guess it's not the flying help here. Well, just remember that's 3.8 because what's going on there is in the documentation under RDO planes, calibrating an airspeed sensor. If you read down through this, you'll come to the section right here that talks about the automatic calibration. Go into Mission Planner parameters, set the auto speed, auto calc to 1, take off, fly circular loiter for 5 minutes. Okay, I went 8 minutes or whatever with the Mini Talon, but it tells you here airspeed ratio will be tuned. Tells you here only if the value has changed by more than 5% from the last saved value. Land. Go into the full parameters list and change airspeed auto calc back to 0 to prevent further changes. Now, item 4 right here in Mission Planner, config tune full parameters list. Click refresh parameters and check the value of airspeed ratio. Normally it will be in the range between 1.5 and 3. Oh, mine was what, 3.8 at its last tune, and it shut off, and the Mini Talon went on for many minutes and didn't do any more after it was 3.8. Whereas the Nano Talon did several through the whole 4 that we can see through the whole 5-minute return to launch loiter. If it is outside this range, which mine is, and you have checked for leaks, then if practical, you should consider relocating the pitot tube to reduce the aerodynamic interference from adjacent fuselage, wings, etc. Well, my airspeed sensor's right out there on the nose of the aircraft. I don't see how moving it around is going to do a darn thing. So I'm a little bit concerned about that, but as you saw in that graph, The airspeed and ground speed got closer to each other after that second ratio reset, and the throttle craziness that I heard in the first portion of the flight that kind of bothered me, didn't sit well with me hearing it, went away. And after it went away, things settled back down with the throttle output. So I think the Mini Talon is sort of ready also for auto tuning and then a revisitation of airspeed sensor calibration and maybe replacing some of the parts. Maybe I pinched the tubing inside. Maybe I know I hot glued some of it along the edge of the fuselage. Maybe I made the tubing soft with the heat of the hot glue and it closed up. I don't know. I'll have to see. It'd be really easy to put a second airspeed sensor on it and compare the output of the two and then go with the best one. So that's some of the things I alluded to last night about the telemetry logs and some of the things I had found in the viewing of the telemetry logs from the Mini Talon flight, especially as you can see that throttle blurb early in the flight, which I am now not setting the airspeed use, and that's this perimeter right here. Airspeed use. This is the Mini Talon. Because it got closer at the end of that calibration, it seems to be okay, but it's reading off, but it's reading correctly, I am going to use it. And I'll probably leave it at use when I come back and do the calibration, because when I turn this back on, the AutoCalc back on, because it is closer to correct. And at any time you can override that calibration. Okay, so there's just some tidbits of stuff that like I say, I alluded to in last night's video, and some of the changes I made on the Mini Talon due to telemetry, Nano Talon, Sky Hunter, this general garbage today, while another snowstorm is supposed to approach this afternoon. Thanks, guys.